Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for COVID-19 Economic Recovery, Capital Region Public Sector Impacts. We still have people filing in. We have a nice audience today. We had 150 people register for our session this morning. To kick things off, I'm going to turn it to Marcus Diglione, the Executive Director for Cdrpc. Mark, go ahead.
Thanks, Kate, and thank you to everyone for joining us today, and particularly thank our speakers, Laura Schultz, Shelby Schneider, and Kate Baker. Today we have a compelling conversation about local government impacts, and Cdrpc is pleased to be able to offer this thought-provoking program to you today. Cdrpc was established by Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady counties, and has worked collaboratively with municipalities across our region since 1967, addressing the many issues that connect our communities together, whether it's economic development, water quality, sustainability, or economic development. Cdrpc is a ready partner providing a regional perspective, technical assistance, and services to our communities throughout the Capital District. Today's webinar is part of our portfolio of services that we provide communities and organizations in our region. What underpins the work that we do is working in partnership with others, and today's event would not be possible without the continued support of Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady counties, and our many partners providing presentations today. Since our April 30th kickoff of this webinar series, we've connected with more than 300 participants, offering compelling programs, planning and zoning board credits, and continuing the conversation that will help shape regional planning as we move forward. During these uncertain times, there are really few answers, but I do hope today's presentation will provide some thought-provoking concepts and allow us to think carefully about the framework as we move towards recovery from the current crisis. So thank you again to the speakers, and with that, I'll turn it over to Cdrpc's Director of Planning and Economic Development, Kate Maynard, for introducing our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Some housekeeping just to start for everyone. I think everyone's getting pretty familiar with the Zoom webinars and calls these days. But just a reminder that you participants are all muted and videos off for security purposes. No one wants any Zoom bombing or other things going on. We also want to remind you, you can use the chat feature. So that's at the bottom portion of your screen to submit any questions. How we're going to look to handle questions is to really reserve the latter portion of the 1 hour session to be able to provide some question and answers with our 3 speakers or with Cdrpc. But type your question in as we go, as it's on your mind, and we can retain that for at that point. If it's extremely time sensitive, I may ask the speakers to go ahead and address that question as they continue their presentation. This presentation is being recorded, so we are making all our webinars available after the fact on Cdrpc's website. In terms of the session today, we're very excited to really continue what we know is a topic that is very much on our regional minds and individually. Again, it's titled COVID-19 Economic Recovery with a Capital Region Focus, and really turning to our public sector economies. As COVID-19 continues to take its toll on American lives, it also continues to wreak havoc on local business and economies. Our panel will look at some of the economic impacts in the Capital Region, SBA funding, and other federal funding assisting businesses, and what municipalities need to be thinking about as the region prepares to reopen. And we put in their hint, it won't be back to business as usual. You'll hear that from our speakers today. So as we continue to shelter at home, just to start to kind of think about our session today, you know, we're really getting used to this swirling around us in terms of the world. We have businesses experiencing a lot of economic pain. We see relief efforts such as federal funding coming out through CARES and other sources, really to act as a lifeline to businesses and institutions. As we've seen the economic waves hit first that private sector side, we're now starting to see the ramifications of reduced sales taxes, the stilted economic effects in the region really coming and hitting New York State and local governments in a massive way. As Mark stressed, we want to note that the webinar today is 1 hour and is definitely a start of a conversation versus an end-all recovery prescription. Really, the session arose out of the questions that we've asked ourselves and we've been discussing amongst ourselves personally and professionally. So things such as, what does the economic picture look like in New York State and Capital Region right now as a result of the pandemic? How have SBA and other relief programs been working? Have they helped our local businesses directly and indirectly our local governments? And finally, in talking to a number of different organizations and public officials around the region, what are some of the best practices that are starting to come out? Both national examples as well as what's being done locally. There's a lot of good examples of either individual actions or private sector collaboration currently happening. So we really want to start this conversation. In talking to those around the region, officials, staff, EDOs, those focused on really efforts to respond to and now recover from this pandemic, it's notable that each community is unique, has its own specific circumstances, but there's much more in common than not. So for examples in responding to the crisis initially, now how to balance reopening our public health needs with recovery, and then turning into dealing with the current economic realities and our plan for recovery. There also can be an additional strength in sharing best practices and potentially seeking out collaborations across borders that may not have been considered before. A few examples of that we all are kind of hearing in the overall context of conversation: securing PPEs, and examples of collaboration across our region and elsewhere. How we get that important necessary gear to be able to allow our businesses and institutions to open up in the future. Ideas such as closing streets to provide additional socially distant public space. So you see locations like Seattle, New York City, Minneapolis, and there are some local examples in the region that are considering this as a measure to provide that socially distant space, as well as potentially collaboratively with private businesses and what their needs will be. Drive-through permitting, online applications, virtual public hearings, helplines such as the City of Troy for businesses and organizations, online collaborations for public sector or industry-specific focus. We know in moving forward, these are things that will have to be more in the forefront of actions in terms of how we've always done things, pivoting into how we need to do things now. New York pause, as we know, has been in effect since mid-March, and it's set to lift starting tomorrow, May 15th. The 7 metrics recommended by the CDC are really providing that overall ability to be able to reopen on a phased manner. Currently, the capital region, as of yesterday, was meeting 5 out of 7 of these metrics, and we're very hopeful that these will be met in the very near future. We can secure those 2 final metrics being positive. We know that reopening the world still will be very different. And again, how to balance the public health needs and prevent the spread of the virus is going to be key, while offering the ability for society as a whole to return. Longer term recovery will require planning and implementation from every perspective and thinking differently, as we've talked about. So to shine some light on a view of the economic conditions facing the capital region, we have our 3 speakers here today that have been involved in COVID response around the region and are here to provide some important analysis as to what is happening in the public sector since the pandemic, provide a practitioner point of view in federal SBA programs and impact on our businesses and indirectly our local governments. And finally, examples of response and recovery focused efforts in collaboration with public and private businesses. So I'm going to introduce all 3 speakers. Our first speaker is Laura Schultz. She's the Director of Fiscal Analysis at the Rockefeller Institute. Laura has an extensive research portfolio studying how innovation creates economic opportunity. While at the Bureau of Economic Analysis, she developed measures used to assess levels of innovation in the US economy and their contribution to gross domestic product. As a faculty member at SUNY Polytechnic Institute, she worked with collegiate entrepreneurs as a commercialization advisor to guide them through the early stages of validation and venture formation. She has studied how university and state policies can foster or hinder an entrepreneurial ecosystem. At Rockefeller, she explores how state and local governments can support innovation and generate economic growth and evaluate the fiscal and economic impacts of federal, state, and local policies. So Laura will kick things off. I'm going to go through as well Kate Baker and Shelby Schneider's overviews. Kate Baker will be our second speaker. She's the interim director of the Small Business Development Center at the University at Albany. She's been extremely busy of late in terms of providing guidance with her colleagues to the many people seeking assistance through PPP, as well as other SBA programs. Kate oversees a team of business advisors that work directly with current and future small business owners and entrepreneurs to establish, grow, and expand their businesses. Kate's specialty areas include general business development, business mentoring, marketing plan development, procurement and certification assistance, financial management, and customer service. Kate was also responsible for launching the entrepreneurship initiatives at SUNY Adirondack in 2018. That included developing regional resource partnerships, creating a hub for students, faculty, and staff to access the business community. Finally, we have Shelby Schneider. She's the president and CEO of Saratoga County Prosperity Partnership. The Saratoga County Prosperity Partnership leads a host of critical economic and workforce development initiatives across the public and private sectors, driving economic success for residents, businesses, and government in Saratoga County. The partnership provides a point of contact for business retention and expansion, enables a seamless delivery of programs and services for businesses seeking to grow. The Saratoga Partnership spearheads semiconductor industry marketing and attraction, global trade assistance, community economic development, and data collection. So we're very pleased to have our three speakers with us today. In the interest of time, I'm going to turn it now over to Laura Schultz. Laura, please go ahead and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate, and for Mark for the invitation. And I'll get my screen shared. So I want to just give an overview today of what the economic impact has been in the Capital Region, and give you an idea of some of what experts are thinking the recovery could potentially look like, and then what are those impacts on state and local governments in the area. And my disclaimer is that this is an entirely new economic situation. There's a lot of uncertainty, so everything that I'm presenting today is just based on what we know as of today, and of course the situation is likely to change. There have been, here are the unemployment impacts. I think the most immediate economic impacts that people have observed are the loss of jobs. And so here I have the list of unemployment filers from March 8th through May 2nd. New data is coming out today. And to put that all in context, I also am including here in this in the second column the level of employment this time last year in each of these regions. So we see a fairly wide disparity across New York on employment impacts. Capital Region has fared the best to date, with about only 14% of 2019 employment filing for unemployment, but you see bigger hits in Long Island and Western New York. So the Capital Region has not seen the same level of unemployment filings. We're definitely seeing the same shape when we have Capital Region, New York City and Long Island, and the rest of the state. And this may be a bit of an underestimation. There's still some issues with unemployment filing and people are still filing, so this number is likely to grow. And Siena College Research Institute did a survey last week, and they found that 26% of households in the Capital Region had at least one member of the household who had been laid off. So it is possible that that number will be higher. So how are these layoffs occurring? And we're seeing them happen in three waves. The first wave was our full contact industries, so the businesses and the workers who have to deal with other people for their living. So accommodations, restaurants, arts and recreation, our hairdressers, our stores, and then the non-essential ambulatory healthcare. So those were the first set of layoffs to occur. And then as those businesses shuttered, we see that the production and supply chain companies didn't have the demand and also shuttered in response to a fall in demand and also in response to shutdown orders. And now the third wave, which is just beginning to start, are going to be the professional workers in management, public administration, and government. So here are some of the numbers in each one of those sectors. So here are the 5 sectors that were in the first wave. And these accounted for 56% of the unemployment claims filed in New York State since the beginning of the COVID crisis. And these sectors in general account for about 40% of our economy. These are the ones that are most impacted. Next came the production industries. 37% of employment filers have come from these sectors, and they account for 20% of capital region employment, 21% of capital region employment. And finally, here are these professional sectors. We see that the information industry has seen high levels of unemployment, but if we look at professional, scientific, technical services, management of company and enterprises, finances, insurance, and public administration, which are government workers, all of these are seeing a much lower level of unemployment filings than the other sectors. And this is really why the capital region has been relatively insulated from the large-scale unemployment impacts being seen somewhere in Western New York. 22% of our workforce works in state, local, or federal government, and this sector at this point has only been 1% of unemployment claims. So the capital region's economy relies heavily on the industries that haven't really been hit yet, but the third wave could be coming. So now that we know what's been happening to date, I can talk a little bit about what we're anticipating moving forward. This is the most recent forecast published by the New York State Division of the Budget, and they expect that the total economic loss in New York is going to be $445 billion. And that New York State won't get to pre-COVID levels of output, GDP, until early 2023. So it's going to be 3 years of impacts. The biggest impact is going to be felt in this quarter, and it will look like about a 12% decline in output statewide. And then you see here, there will be a quick jump back, but then a long haul back to full economic activity. Now, a couple of things to remember when we're looking at these numbers. First of all, it assumes that the economy will restart at the beginning of Q3 2020, which would be July 1st. And we're on track at this point for that to occur, but we will know a little bit more about how realistic that assumption is in 2 weeks after the restarts have started to occur. It is assuming a gradual phase-in of economic activity. It's based on the 4 phases and the low-risk, high-value industries going first. And it's also assuming that the public health crisis remains under control and that we won't need any additional shutdowns. An additional shutdown would create even greater additional damage. And it can be helpful to take a look at what the sectoral forecasts are as you think about your local economies to get a better sense of when industries are going to recover. The smallest impacts are going to be in finance and insurance, which is an important industry in New York State. And the forecasts predict that it will recover within a year back to its pre-COVID levels. Healthcare, the non-essential healthcare services, the dental appointments, the eye appointments, your annual checkups, it had an impact in 2020, but economists predict that there will be some pent-up demand and that will likely return to normal within about a year. Transportation, they're assuming that people aren't going to be inclined to get on planes or on trains anytime soon, that the transportation sector is going to take 2 years to recover, construction will take 2 years to recover, and retail and accommodation will be among the last to recover to their pre-COVID levels. So New York State Division of the Budget has also started to talk about what the impacts on New York State's fiscal situation will be. And the current numbers are a $13.3 billion shortfall, driven primarily by a loss of revenue, but also higher costs. And that's going to continue for 4 years. So over 4 years, it will be $69 billion are their projections. And that's going to have an impact on state and local governments as well. So here, this chart shows how New York state government and its local governments on average raise revenue. So the federal government is a big contributor to New York State, and we still don't know what the federal government assistance is going to be. The state government relies or local governments rely heavily on state government, and the budget this year has points where the amount of aid the state provides to these local governments and school districts could be impacted or lowered. The potential impact is 20%, a 20% decline. Property taxes are a big factor for local governments. Fortunately, economists are not predicting an immediate impact on property tax revenues compared to a lot of other revenue sources. If the economic downturn continues for an extended period of time, you could see property taxes decline over a longer time period. Sales tax revenues are predicted, depending on the study, to be down 10 to 25% for this year. And with still slower hotels and restaurant sales, you should expect lower sales tax revenue in coming years as well. Higher levels of unemployment will mean lower individual income taxes, corporate taxes will be down, and then the miscellaneous charges and revenues that local governments use, like court fees, traffic tickets, parking facilities, and the state government relies on for fees, those will also likely to be down, and it depends on exactly how revenue is raised. So mild case, local budgets should be looking at about a 10%, local governments should be looking at about a 10% loss in local revenues. In a worst case, 17 to 20%, but it could be worse for local communities that rely more heavily on those industries like tourism that are going to be a longer term return to normalcy. And this also doesn't take into consideration any of the additional expenditures that communities are and local governments are going to be facing. And we're seeing these impacts already. Almost every city and county in New York State has started to publish or has started to release the budgetary impacts that they're facing and their plans for dealing with them. And a big part of that may likely be municipal layoffs. The League of Cities, which is a national organization, estimates that 300,000 to 1 million people who are employed in the public sector may face furloughs in coming years. Almost all local municipalities and school districts are discussing workforce reductions, and they acknowledge that the impacts on budgets are going to likely last years. So I took a look at the Great Recession and what happened to our state and local governments after the Great Recession. So that was 07 through 09. And here's the employment in the private sector in the blue, and we see that during the recession, there was a decline, but the year following the recession, it recovered, and it's grown steadily since. State government employment started to fall midway through the recession and fell 8%, and has really only returned to about 98% of pre-recession levels. Local government employment in the capital region, local governments didn't lay off anyone during the recession. There wasn't a large decline in employment during the Great Recession, but in the 6 years following, there was a steady decline. And now state and local employment is only at 93% of pre-recession levels. Now, economists are concerned about this because we learned an important lesson from the Great Recession. State and local governments laid off people, cut their spending, scaled back investment in response to the Great Recession. They wanted to balance their budgets and make sure they didn't have the revenues, and they wanted to balance the budgets. And as a result, services were cut and spending was reduced. But these governments also play a critical role in their local economies. In the capital region, they account for 22% of workers and almost a fifth of our GDP. So when when the economy is in downturn and also the government is in downturn, it worsens and lengthens the recovery from the recession. And there's a large community of experts arguing that that mistake can't be repeated in COVID, and that state and local governments are going to need federal support to avoid repeating those mistakes. And people are watching closely to see what that will look like, and hopefully that will form over the next couple of weeks. So in conclusion, while the recovery will likely start soon as these regions start to reopen, the impacts are going to be over the long term. New York State is looking at revenue challenges for the next 4 years, and municipalities should probably be looking at that time range as well. And without aid, municipalities could see some significant revenue shortfalls and should be thinking strategically about how they can look into partnerships with other jurisdictions, with private sector members of their community to try to offset some of this.
Thank you, Laura. And just to note, some of the questions come in. Thank you for that, both the chat and the Q&A feature. Looking at those, some are more specific that we may provide to the individual panelists afterwards for responses because they are so specific. And also there's one about construction that I will hold until the end portion because I think it's one that more than one perspective may want to chime in on. So thank you, Laura. We're now going to turn to Kate Baker. Again, she's the interim director for SBDC at the University of Albany.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me today. So I'm going to talk about really briefly some programs that everyone is pretty familiar with related to the SBA CARES Act funding and the non-CARES Act programs that they have. The first one is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. It's commonly referred to EIDL because we like our acronyms at the SBA. And there's two components to it. One is the EIDL Advance, which is up to $10,000 and forgivable. And then there is the EIDL Loan, which is a working capital loan based on your historical gross profits. And the terms on those are 3.75%, 30 years with a 1-year payment deferral. Currently, this program is closed to new applications unless it's to an agriculture business that was originally shut out of the program. They are still processing advances and loans within this program, and it's based on the current congressional appropriations for it. What is our performance as a state Ben? So in the EIDL Advance to date, there's been 235,000 plus advances issued for a total of 733. I want to say, I can't do my math in my head today, $733 million. And in perspective on a national comparison, that's 4th nationwide. So historically in SBA programs, we usually end up in the top 4. The states that we compete with are California, Florida, and Texas. And so as long as we end up in that top 4, we're performing as we should on a national perspective. For the EIDL loans, they've issued 1,600 loans to date for $356 million. And those loans take a lot longer to process than the advances or some of the other programs. This particular program is not tied to any particular legislation. This is the traditional economic platform that the SBA utilizes for single event disasters like tornadoes and hurricanes. When you're looking at our performance, it is important to note that New York was not the first state opened in this program. It was California, Washington, Texas, Ohio, Connecticut, New Jersey, and then New York. We received early designations prior to the CARES Act. So that's why when you look at some of those numbers, it's a little bit skewed based on how quickly those applications went in by the other states. Let's see here. For this particular program, sorry for the title, I just realized it's the wrong one. Paycheck Protection Program. So this is, is based on average monthly eligible payroll expenses. Maximum loan amount is $10 million. Any loan over over 2 million will be audited. Up to 100% of the loan can be forgiven. It is designed to turn into a grant vehicle. For the portions that are not forgiven, 1% interest on a 2-year term. The forgivable expenses that money that you can spend the loan on and have it be forgiven are those eligible payroll expenses, rent or mortgage interest, and utilities. The forgiveness criteria, this has been in place since the beginning of the program, that 75% of the loan funds must be used towards payroll expenses. In addition to that, the employer agrees not to reduce their headcount by more than 25% and any individual employee's wages by 25%. So there's a couple of metrics that they have to adhere to. And then results. So this program had 2 rounds. There was the first round where it ran out of money, and we performed nationally 4th with 81,000 loans for $20 billion. In round 2, which is currently active, there's $100 billion left as of yesterday in available funds to lend. There have been 190,000 loans for, I think, $18 billion. From a little bit of perspective, more anecdotally, at the SBDC, we have seen the majority of loans, at least for the clients that we've worked with, going to small businesses with an average loan size of about $100,000. So, none of those larger businesses that you've been reading about in the news are the ones that we've been working with. So I'd like to transition a little bit about talking about moving forward, right? We're, as a community, hopefully we'll be reopening soon. What we're hearing from a lot of businesses right now, as far as, their current immediate concerns, if you get outside of the financial and the cash flow issues, which I think everybody has at this point, they're really concerned about the lack of reopening communications. So the regional control rooms were announced, I think it was either early this week or last week. There hasn't been a lot of information. If you're a business in the capital region and you want to reopen, what are you supposed to do? Is there a plan? Who do you submit it to? What are you required to adhere to? So a lot of that information is still missing. And that is their primary concern. And it will likely hold up some of the openings because no one wants to be closed for not doing what they were supposed to do. They're also looking at survival strategies and long-term viability of their businesses. And a really big concern right now is that PPP forgiveness, because that is going to be coming due for the first round of loan applications starting in early June. We are seeing a lot of businesses starting to transition from that triage mentality to a survival mentality, which is good. We would like to see more of that. And I think that that's something that not only businesses need to be thinking about, also municipalities. So, we've gotten through hopefully the worst of it at this point. And how are we going to, as a community, not just businesses, it's everything from education to municipalities to the nonprofit sectors, how are we going to transition our thinking from that triage mode into some of the survival mode? Because from survival, you get into recovery and resiliency. And from that standpoint, what we're seeing a lot of thought process for those that have started to make that transition. And, we've all heard, we're thinking outside of the box. Really, we're hearing about throwing the box away and really redefining business models across the boards. And that's also true for municipalities and nonprofits, as well as education. A lot of entrepreneurial leadership focus across the sectors in their approaches to problems. And this isn't necessarily just true to our region, it's true across the country. I read a story last week about a school that has decided has figured out a way that they can operate and bring their students back while accommodating social distancing. And it was, relatively genius and also incredibly simple. That instead of having all the students in school on the same day, they were going to take their student body, divide it in half. The more at-risk students were going to go to school on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then participate via technology on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And their lower at-risk students were going to go to school on Tuesday and Thursday, which reduced their bus capacity by 50%, their classroom capacity by 50%, didn't require any additional staffing, and they're already using the technology for that at-home learning, but it would give the face-to-face contact that a lot of the students need and start to bring things back into the classroom. So I don't know if that's possible here, but you know, it's really just kind of throwing out that box and revisiting how we do things. We also are starting to see some local collaborations, and I think that these are really great. The one that I'm going to talk a little bit about is one of the early ones, and it's the Support Albany initiative. In late March, a group got together, and it includes the economic development agencies, the business improvement districts, the local municipality, business support services, have all been meeting every week since then to address the immediate needs of the business community and the greater community at large. And as a result, they've been able to have a lot of quick actions that have impacted some of the abilities that were able to partially operate, improve their ability to do so. So like a good example would be in the city of Albany, by like the second week of the closures, the restaurants in downtown had realized that some of the parking rules and the sidewalk rules made that curbside pickup difficult for them. And so the city was able to change the rules for the period of the shutdown that enabled the businesses to put out cones and have pickup zones and have sandwich signage on their sidewalks so that people knew where to go. And it increased the volume of those pickup orders. And it, instead of going through your traditional planning board process, they were able to realize an immediate need and come up with an immediate solution because it was going to be temporary. And then the other thing that you have to be considering is some of the congressional programming that's going to come out. From a concern standpoint with the small business community, we see people making decisions a lot of times about proposals to legislation that may or may not come to fruition. So we tend to discourage that just because if it doesn't come to fruition and you make decisions on it, it can have significant detrimental impacts. But the big thing moving forward, I think, is really going to be, you know, that disruptive leadership, that disruptive approach to how you do things. The worst thing that anyone in any sector can do right now is because that's how we've always done it, be an acceptable answer. Doesn't mean that the process isn't wrong, but you should be looking at every process, everything that you do, how you do it, and evaluating, is this the most effective way for us to do this? Is it the most cost-effective way? What is our return on investment? How do we improve that? Who can we bring to the table to assist us with this? You know, prior to the pandemic, many times groups worked in silos. And fortunately, we're seeing those silos break down, but I think they need to break down even more. And so those are my initial thoughts. I'm going to turn it over to Shelby now.
First and foremost, thank you so much, Kate, and Cdrpc for inviting me to participate today. I think that as an organization, we have been actively involved in engaging with the business community, our governments, and organizations like the Small Business Development Center to ensure that we are providing the most up-to-date resources for businesses as quickly as possible, because, you know, everyone's tired of hearing this, but this has obviously been a very unprecedented situation. And Laura, looking through your data, at the very beginning of this crisis, right about March 18th, we released a COVID business impact survey. And, you know, I'm not surprised to see that a lot of the business impact that you were talking about in the retail and the service sector, you know, we were seeing the exact same trends here in our community. And we were seeing, you know, the needs that Businesses needed financing. They needed short-term financing. They needed bridge financing and some guidance as to how they were going to get by in the next few weeks. Well, 2 months later, you know, here we are. The federal government has released a stimulus package that, you know, a program that was created essentially in 2+ weeks by the federal government is obviously going to have, it's going to be like Swiss cheese. It's going to have some holes. And, you know, we're starting to see that, and we are working collaboratively with our businesses, as Kate was saying, rethink everything that you're doing. And as an organization, we do not work alone. From the beginning of when we were starting to see COVID hit the United States, and when we were starting to see the impact, you know, especially down in Westchester, and the transitional closing of businesses and, you know, ramping down to 75%, 50%, 25%, businesses were scrambling to figure out, how in the world am I ever going to operate like this? And, you know, over the week, we saw that we ended up with a shelter in place, and businesses were figuring out whether or not they were deemed essential or not. And that was definitely a challenge for us. It was a challenge for the business community. But I think in our case, collaboration has been everything to ensure that the business community understands what's going on with essentially one voice. And in Saratoga County, we've been actively working with our Saratoga County Chamber of Commerce, our Convention and Visitors Bureau, our downtown business associations, our partner economic development organizations, Saratoga Economic Development, to do that business outreach. So part of that included providing a business survey that we've had over 300 businesses reply to. And again, some of the first things that they were asking for was working capital. How am I going to pay my employees? How am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to pay my utilities? From there, our organization started working together to prepare businesses for applying for the payroll protection program and the EIDL programs. And also working with their workforce to deal with the unemployment system. The SBA and the New York State Department of Labor they don't have systems that have ever been designed for the amount of volume that has been coming through their doors. And it has been, you know, I think that we're starting to see the technological obstacles that we've been up against, but these systems weren't designed for the amount of volume that we've had. And businesses and individuals have been, you know, have needed a significant amount of guidance. And as local organizations, we've all been there to work with them to provide that. Now that businesses have some bridge loans and financial stability, and we're starting to see how this loan forgiveness will be rolled out. And I know that Kate and her organization and the SBA is going to do a fantastic job in trying to communicate that when we see more of those rules. And as we start to see the chance for reopening, I know that 2 days ago, we have these reopening criteria, and, you know, Saratoga County is lumped in with a lot of other communities in our region, you know, including Albany County, Rensselaer County. And unfortunately, we took a slight step back in the regional protocols that we were meeting. We went from meeting 6 out of 7 criteria to 5 out of 7 criteria. So we see that, you know, things can change in a day for us. And I think we are going to be opening soon, but our ramp up is not going to be like turning on a light switch. You know, as my colleague Todd Shimkus from the Saratoga County Chamber says, it's going to be more like turning slowly on a dimmer switch, and it's going to start carefully with certain industry sectors. And we are going to see, you know, construction, limited retail, our manufacturing sector, wholesale and retail, wholesale trade have the ability to open first, and then eventually we're going to be able to see, you know, professional services, retail, administrative support. But in order to open, you know, I think we talked about everyone is going to need a plan. And, you know, luckily there is some guidance out there, and we need to make sure that employees are going to be protected, and our businesses' customers are going to be protected. And luckily, OSHA, I know on the Saratoga County Chamber website, on the Saratoga Partnership website, we do have links to these resources, and there are very industry-specific guidance to how to create your reopening plan. You know, as Kate said, we don't know yet whether or not you have to submit or who you have to submit a plan to, and hopefully, you know, we are going to need incredible amounts of cooperation from our business communities and our workforce and our customers to make sure that we are wearing personal protection equipment, that we are following social distancing safety protocol, that we are moving forward in a really careful and thoughtful way, because the last thing that we want to see, you know, and seeing Laura talk about how the economy is going to recover to pre-COVID in 2023, that scares me. And I think it's going to be, that timeline is going to be extended much further out if we don't all work collaboratively together to make sure that we are self-policing for the most part. And I've talked to many businesses that have reached out and said, I've got my plan together. You know, anyone as small as a hair salon to a larger organization, and they have their plan together. They feel pretty confidently that they're ready to open. Who do I submit this to? It's like, have your plan and work your plan and communicate with your workforce and your employees and your customers to make sure that it's an active, living, breathing document that you live by, to ensure that we don't have another slip back or that your business doesn't end up being a potential hotspot. But our collective group of organizations has actually worked together to put together personal protection equipment kits for a lot of our small mom and pop shops throughout Saratoga Springs, Saratoga County, to ensure that they have the right resources so that they can get up and running. A lot of that collaboration, or that those collection points, have been done by the Saratoga Springs City Center, and hopefully we are going to be deploying them as soon as this weekend. Or at least putting them together as soon as this weekend. So if you have any questions about putting those together, please let us know. They include everything from masks, which have been donated by Momentum Performance Materials, Death Wish Coffee, Ball Metal Container has given a significant amount of resources to that. And we've also got hand sanitizer for every business from Yankee Distillery, which is a distillery in Clifton Park, which is now transitioned to making hand sanitizers because that's basically, they could do that. Something that we're also doing is, you know, when you think of Saratoga County, you think about the racetrack, you think about SPAC, and how the opening up strategy is going to have such a significant impact on an industry sector that brings $1 billion to our economy every year. And we need to start rethinking what Saratoga County has to offer. And, you know, Saratoga Springs was originally settled as a place of health and respite with healing waters. During the Victorian era, we had more hotel rooms per capita than any other place in the country, if not the world, because it was a place where people came for summer respite. And then that ended up birthing our Saratoga race course. So we have a very, very deep history in health and respite, and I think there are significant impacts that we can make collectively on our tourism economy, and we are blessed to have open space here. We have state parks, we have Spa State Park, we have, you know, a beautiful downtown Congress Park, we have Moreau State Park, we have the battlefield. We have assets that we can also transition to still salvage certain parts of our tourism economy, which drives hospitality tax, bed tax, and also sales tax revenue, which is critical to our governments in Saratoga County. So we're working with an organization called Mind Genomics, which is based right in Saratoga Springs. Ken Rotundo is the principal there, and they do perception surveys for organizations like Amazon, Microsoft, work very closely with IBM, and we're working with them to help understand what is the mindset of the traveler and what kinds of things, you know, beyond, once we meet all our personal protection equipment you know, like once we meet all our safety protocol, once we really understand what we need to do as businesses to move forward, what is the general consumer going to want to see to be able to feel safe? And that's something that we're working on very closely with, and you can probably see some results of that coming up in the next few weeks. But let me see. Moving forward, I think that, you know, as Kate was talking about, when businesses are looking at 50% potential occupancy and trying to meet social distancing standards, you know, they're going to have to start also thinking about how to recast their business plan and whether or not their business is going to be viable and survive, and also think about different ways that they can actually operate. And, you know, we have tremendous free resources here in Saratoga Springs and Saratoga County that can help businesses, including the Small Business Development Center, as well as SCORE, to help businesses preserve their cash to be able to operate while meeting a lot of the challenges of what we're seeing going forward. You know, something that we're also seeing is we've been very, very lucky to have a great manufacturing sector here in Saratoga County between Global Foundries, Momentum Performance Materials, you know, that's a lot of our major employers, Stewart's, Saratoga Hospital, our healthcare providers. We've had that level of resiliency, that we've had businesses that have been able to stay open and that have been able to maintain health and safety for their employees and their workforce and their customers. But moving forward, I think that we have seen major gaps in our supply chain, and we are very reliant on a global economy, which has been good, but in this case, this has been very challenging to us. And I think if anyone saw the Wall Street Journal article that came out on Monday and the Times Union article from Eric Anderson that came out as well, there are going to be significant opportunities for reshoring, and especially in the semiconductor industry, and especially in the semiconductor industry supply chain. And I think in this case, we don't want to be caught flat-footed again. And there are going to be real opportunities in biotech, in semiconductor manufacturing and suppliers, and some of the chemical components, also in medical devices. I got a call yesterday from a business that is interested in potentially producing N95 masks and or medical kits for testing. And so that is going to be critical to us moving forward. I'm just going to jump ahead because I know I talked to Kate quite a bit about what we're also seeing. You know, I think communities have done a really good job adapting to technology, and moving forward, I think we've seen some of our weak points when it comes to technology. And I think that rural connectivity is going to be a big issue. I mean, we've seen it in the impact that it has had on distance learning, on telemedicine, on individuals needing healthcare that cannot get to a doctor, and it's not necessarily safe for them to go into a hospital setting right now. And as far as rural economic development, I think that, you know, we've had farmers, dairy farmers, there's a real opportunity for them to produce value-added products, but some of, I'm sorry about this. Okay, I'm hearing something.
You didn't realize how well I had.
I'm just sorry, I'm hearing some background noise, but I think that we have a real opportunity for now starting to plan for additional rural connectivity, including you know, Wi-Fi and rural hotspots. And I think that this is going to have a significant impact on.
A lot of stuff out there.
This is going to have a significant impact on our students who live in rural areas, our agricultural businesses that are having challenges actually developing a website or selling value-added products. And, you know, the work that we could do in telemedicine is really, really significant. You know, I was talking to Kate about our tourism economy and how do we support our downtowns? How do we support our business community? And how do our communities really start to think like our businesses and behave like we are open for business? And like I said, you know, we've been quick adopters in adopting Zoom meetings and getting our meetings online. And how can we get existing projects that are in the pipeline starting to move through? You know, when we're talking about our retailers and restaurants, we know that probably the safest place you could be is in open air spaces. And like Kate was saying, a lot of communities, and there was even in the business review today, are starting to look at closing streets and allowing, you know, businesses to really spread out tables on sidewalks so that we have more space and that businesses can take advantage of open air spaces. And, you know, whether that's going to require, you know, temporary permits to allow for larger sidewalk cafes, whether we start to take over parking lots and, you know, like I said, close streets on a temporary basis. And also, you know, this is a big thing, but possibly can we work with the state liquor authority and our state and our local communities about possibly looking differently at possible open container laws? And I mean this, that if a business can take advantage of takeout, sell a bottle of wine, and let someone go and picnic in a neighboring park, you know, maybe we can think less about the actual restriction of consuming the alcohol and more about possibly thinking about making sure that people don't behave badly or public drunkenness, et cetera. But, you know, there's a lot that we can rethink with our communities. And I think we are collectively working together to think outside of the box, take advantage of our open spaces, start to really, as communities, think for what's coming next, take advantage of federal stimulus dollars to assist us with infrastructure programs, for helping our businesses transition through this COVID process and really move into the future. And, you know, luckily for organizations like Cdrpc, you know, we have these EDA funds that could be coming through the pipeline, and I really am excited to be working with them and work with communities that we can start to think bigger, think differently, and keep investing in ourselves so that we can be better moving forward. So I won't take up too much time. Thank you. Kate?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Shelby, for that. And I think one of the things that resonates with what you're saying is that, you know, obviously we know this is a time of immense challenges, but on the flip side of that, as is often the case, there's also immense opportunities. So speaking to some of the short-term potential aspects as well as longer-term, appreciate hearing the perspective of one county. And again, on a regional scale, we're hearing great things such as what Shelby mentioned for Saratoga County, in each of the other 3 counties that we work regularly with. And one of the things we have as a thought is to follow up this webinar with more information and presentations from other great work that's going on, those perspectives from around the region. So we're at 11 o'clock. We initially pointed out a 1-hour period for this. So what I'll first do is turn to the questions that we've received that probably make the most sense to answer in this format. If anyone else has additional questions, please go ahead and put those in now. The more specific ones I'm seeing that are related more to, for example, specific PPP guidance, etc. I think what I'll do is, because your name is there, I will pass those on to the panelists that it most makes sense to give that to, and they can either respond here in this venue or potentially even an email afterwards for the thinking of time, basically. So let me pose one to
before we move to the questions. Sorry to interrupt, but there are several questions about guidance for businesses to reopen, the ones that are part of phase 1. And I got an email this morning from the New York State Economic Development Council. The governor's office has released some template guidelines for various sectors that are subject to the phase 1 reopening. And we will include that and share that to the attendees of this webinar this morning.
Thank you, Mark. I was going to mention that right afterwards. That's wonderful. So we'll pass that on to you. Obviously, for those on behalf of the municipality, it's good information for you to know, as well as to understand what's expected of your local businesses and potentially how you can support that effort. So let's go to the first question. There was a question from Patricia Myers in terms of why will construction take so long to recover? Was it not a very robust sector prior to COVID? So I think this was entered in during Laura's conversation, but other panelists may have some perspective as well. So go ahead, Laura.
I think what you're going to see in construction, well, that's based on the fact that we've seen big declines by 30% in the number of construction permits filed for. So new plans moving forward aren't really happening. And in addition, general contractors are reporting that half of their projects are either been halted or have been canceled. And I think when things reopen, consumers who are a little concerned about the economic health of the recovery they'll be out buying clothes and they'll go and buy restaurants, but they probably aren't going to be looking to start a new home, or they're going to want to hold off before doing major construction projects. So I think businesses are also going to be in the same boat. Construction just tends to lag in recovery.
Excellent. I don't know if Shelby or Kate want to chime in as well to that question. No? Okay.
You know, Laura, I'm not going to contradict you, but you know what I heard, I had a conversation with a landscape and design company yesterday, and something that they had said to me is that they're seeing an uptick in basically home redesigns, and I think that might be a result of people spending so much time and at home, and they're looking at potential home improvement projects, and they're actually looking at some retraining for their workforce right now, and are looking for resources for that. So, I'm always like, problem opportunity, but yeah, we're
right.
seeing.
And I think, since people are now spending time at home, I think that we're going to see, traditionally people won't go into real estate, but I'm going to guess that, families of 4 that have been in 2-bedroom homes for the last 3 months might be out there chomping at the bit to look at that sector. So COVID is a completely different case. We don't going to know what's going to happen until it actually happens.
Exactly.
Okay.
The only thing that
we do have go ahead, Kate.
I was just going to say, the only thing that I would add when it comes to construction is that we've already started to see a contraction of financing for commercial projects. And we expect that to only get more intense over the next 6 to 8 months. Now, obviously, there will be federal programming that comes out to offset that. We saw that in the last recession. But they're still in triage program development. And so some of the survival vehicles haven't come into play. But that's part of the reason why construction will take a little bit longer to recover, because many times it requires a bank to be on board. And it can take them 3 to 4 years to be a little bit less conservative on the ability to repay.
Excellent. I'm going to note a comment from Elizabeth Kormos. She notes it would be helpful to share the municipality's temporary orders in regards to code issues, use of parking lots, outdoor dining, etc. So that is something that we have been hearing at Cdrpc quite a bit, which obviously as things progress from idea to actually how you do it on a local level, what does that really relate to? I think at least one of our panelists spoke to, is that a permitting situation? Is it a temporary regulation? How is some of this, the more nuts and bolts side of things, how is this actually implemented and actually completed on a local basis? So I don't know if panelists have direct examples. What I will note from Cdrpc's perspective is we're going to continue to compile resources such as this and look to make those available. So if you haven't already, please sign up for our newsletter. It's how we get a lot of our regular communications out. And then in addition, we'll be placing items like this on our website, or also the subject of future webinars. We've had a lot of great ideas shared of what would be helpful. We want to continue to assist our communities and our overall region in terms of moving forward. I don't know if panelists had anything in terms of what you've run into or been able to assist with from the municipal permitting point of view. Kate Baker, I know that you've worked with Albany. We may have some Albany folks on the call as well, but anything that is kind of a lessons learned for our audience as a whole?
Well, I think the greatest lesson learned is that this is going to be constantly evolving, right? This is what you did yesterday may not be sufficient for today, and what you want to do tomorrow may be out of date before tomorrow starts. And that's where kind of that growing out your book. I've heard a lot of talk in the public sector about, strategic planning. And I love strategic plans, but I actually think a strategic plan is almost too cumbersome to manage what we're looking at. You need to have a long-term goal and only action plan what you can control. So to try and action, an updated strategic plan for what the world is going to look like 3 years from now, you just can't do it. And it actually is in a lot of respects can be a waste of resources and valuable time in response. So it's really being able to have that change of mindset to taking a look at where you are today. What is the immediate need? What is the immediate future need? And how does that align with where we want to end? And making decisions based on those qualifications rather than that full-blown strategic planning process. And I do think that will have a place to come back, but probably not for another 6 or 7 months. I mean, we're really going to have to change that mindset and throw out the box of, well, we always like to have everything go through this channel or through this process, and this is the way we've always done it, and it's worked. And that may be true, but it's not working anymore. And as I've heard on the call, like the industries that have already, instead of looking at this as the worst thing that could ever happen to them, and are instead looking at the opportunities in the moment, are the ones that are going to be most successful, right? We saw this in the last recession. Those that buried their heads in the sand and didn't want to make any changes and didn't want to do anything differently than they've always done, either aren't here anymore or are still struggling to recover. Those that quickly adapt are going to be the winners in this pandemic. And so hopefully as a region, we can have winners across every sector, public, private, education, nonprofits. If we all work together on that philosophy, I think that we'll do a lot better than if we, hold to our traditional wheelhouses.
I have
Right.
something to say about this too. I think that, and I said it earlier, there are best practices kind of throughout the world. Unfortunately, this COVID started on the other side of the planet, and we're starting to see communities that, and countries that have come back. And so we have some best practices. I think we've seen some places in Europe like outdoor dining, and some of the changes in closing streets and things like that. What I'd probably encourage, this is such a great opportunity for communities to work hand in hand with businesses in a way that says, what can I do to support your efforts? Because we truly are stronger together. We are in this together. And let's think about, like, when you're thinking about your temporary permits, well, what is it like to close down the streets for a parade? And like maybe start with the close enough and build some of your temporary potential policies off of the close enough, and work collaboratively with your business community, with the public safety, with your health departments. This is such an opportunity for true collaboration. And the more open your community is for business, and I'm not saying give away the store, I'm not saying throw away your permits and throw away your zoning and codes. I'm saying think differently and think collaboratively. And, there are ways to have temporary solutions right now until we eventually, this is a public health crisis, until we actually have a vaccine in place and we're able to really, truly flatten this curve. We have short spurts of time to solve problems, so we can do this collaboratively, but I think that collaborative effort is going to have resonating long-term impacts throughout our area and throughout our region.
Okay, we'll do 2 more questions, given we're at 10 minutes after 11. So one that came in, besides reduced sales tax revenue, what are other economic ramifications to local and county governments? This is from David Sylvester. This may have been submitted midstream, Laura, in your presentation, but is there anything in addition that you want to touch on as other ramifications that answer this question?
No, I think just property taxes are going to be relatively well insulated for the first year. And I think a lot of it's going to depend too on what this next federal aid bill looks like. Unfortunately, that's coming at a time where we need that information now to do budgets, but hopefully that will come into light sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. The final question I'm seeing, well, first, that acknowledgement is in the chat feature. You can see a link to some of those resources based on reopening guidance for the regions. So thank you, Mark, for posting that. If anyone wants to go to the chat and just click on from there, it will take you directly to some of those resources. The final question we'll look at is, what are EDA funds from Alicia Bartlett? That's a question I can definitely give you some information on. EDA funds is, in this case, the $1.5 billion appropriation from the CARES Act. And last Thursday, the programmatic notice of funding opportunity was released, giving some guidance as to what is applicable for applications. In a very brief summary, it's a very flexible, broad funding resource, which is great. So for example, it can go from construction projects to, say, technical planning efforts that are needed to effectively respond to this disaster. It can also entail collaborative efforts. So it's fairly broad in terms of what you're looking at. Revolving loan funds, which is something we're looking at on a regional level to provide benefits to all our communities. If you want more information, please give me a call or reach out via email. I'm fielding a lot of inquiries about this. But it is a great resource to be available, or to know about and know that it's available and be able to progress potentially in your community. So you can look at our website, as well as it was in our recent newsletter, more information about that as well. So I want to thank our panelists. Thank you for your time and your sharing your expertise with our audience today. And I want to thank our audience for joining us. I think the conversation has been very enlightening and has given us some more specifics to the things that we're not only noticing, but witnessing on a daily basis in the Capital Region. So the conversation will absolutely continue, as we noted. So please expect future webinars, as well as information resources to be coming out in the goal to aid and pull us all together. If you have ideas for other webinars or information that you really would like to know, please let us know. We're happy to help. And as all our panelists noted, we're in this together, and working collaboratively is definitely the name of the game. So I hope everyone enjoys your Thursday, enjoy the sunshine out there, and I'm sure we will all talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you.